See that the enacted was 744 and the revised is 736. It is down quite a bit from 2019, and I'll go over that in just a short second. Well, actually, right now. You can see that the actual in fiscal 19, two accounts make up the big drop from 19 to 20. One is abandoned property, and the sale of securities. We're not going to get. There's a $41 million difference in abandoned property, and that's mainly due to the inability to sell securities this year. And of course, the floor stocks tax, when we raise the cigarette tax, that's going to cost us $21.3 million essentially from last year. So those two together make up $62.3 million. That explains why fiscal 20 is 46.4 lower than fiscal 19. On the rest of the taxes, you can see some are up and some are down in our revised estimate. The ones that are down the most are insurance premiums taxes, which are about $1 million less than we thought. Abandoned property is about $1.2 million less than we thought. Compared to the enacted estimate, bank franchise, alcohol taxes, telecom taxes, and inheritance taxes are all quite a bit higher than, not quite a bit on inheritance, but on some of the other taxes are higher than the enacted estimates. On some of the bigger taxes, especially the telecom tax has a big delta because of all the video streaming that's occurring when people are being safe at home. They're streaming more video services, and that's pushing up the telecommunications tax quite a bit, even more so than I thought in the April estimate. There have been downward revisions in natural gas, oil production. Parimutuel has really taken a hit. We didn't have a big race in May, and also the historical horse racing. I won't call them parlors, but the historical horse racing venues have been closed for the most part during the pandemic. So we're not getting the revenue we thought we were going to get in parimutuel taxes. That was a big revision from the enacted. So the combination of these four and the two on the slide before show why the new estimate is lower than the enacted estimate. But one thing that you will note is that when you look at the big spreadsheet that I'm going to show you in a minute, May and June are expected to decline 32.9 million, or 32.9%, which may seem like a big decline for the last 2 months of the year. The biggest part of that's that abandoned property, the 32 million boost that we got in fiscal 19 from the sale of securities. That's just not going to be there this May. We expect parimutuel taxes to be much lower, 3.5 million lower than they were last May and June. Court costs and fees will be lower. We don't expect to get the public service assessment June payment, the $3.5 million, and oil production, natural gas severance taxes will be down. So, yeah, we do expect 32.9% decline in May and June, which may look odd on your spreadsheet, but we can account for that in the accounts I just described. So, before we go to the road fund, I'm going to do what we normally do, and that's pull up a spreadsheet for the general fund. I don't know if you can see this just right. I hope it shows up well enough on your screen to see. It's in the book. Let me see where it's at in the book. There's a tab, General Fund and Road Fund Summary, and they're there. Now, these tables look a little bit different than we normally show. We normally show just the top set of rows, but this time, since we had 1 month of the quarter in, we decided to show a second set of rows that showed what the needs would be for May and June to hit the forecast that we have in the top set of rows. So on the general fund, right now I've got the blend set to 100% pessimistic. Let's change that around a little bit, make it 50-50 just for fun. you can see that if you did a 50-50 blend, the fourth quarter would be an expected 20.4% decline in the total fourth quarter, and the May to June part would be a decline of 11.5%. So to achieve a 50-50 split, you would need receipts could fall 11.5%, and we could still make it. Most of the accounts on the bottom set of rows, the May to June, are not surprisingly declines. The individual income tax is a positive needs for May and June, and that's mainly because of the money that was lost in April due to declaration payments and estimated and final returns. That money comes back in the month of June, so that's why that number is positive. The rest of them are negative, but at this point, Mr. Chairman, I turn it over to you to initiate a discussion to see what kind of blends you want me to tune up and get some reaction from the members as to where they think the general fund's going to go.
So it's mainly a question of the percent pessimistic. Once we get that, then that settles things. So it's a question of how pessimistic you are relative to the control. So I would like to hear some observations.
Dr. Bollinger, you want to?
So if you take the IHC gives us that they have 45% on the control and 35% on the pessimistic, and an additional 20% on the optimistic, but I think we've thrown that out. So if you keep that ratio, you get 56% control and 44% pessimistic.
Yes, that's correct.
But aren't those percentages based off of a more optimistic, pessimistic scenario?
I was partly responsible for throwing out the optimistic. Essentially, given what we had for the fourth quarter, it seemed probability 0 for the optimistic, so the plus was put there. So that's the background to that.
So I'd probably go a little bit further on the control, simply because the pessimistic one is very much downward in this particular estimate relative to what is in the May IHS report.
What do you think, Jose?
Talking about, we said, 100 million or so between them, but if I could just go back a step, I guess I asked the question earlier about the income tax. If I look, the income tax for April was down 7.5%. And I don't know exactly from what we were told here today when every single dollar is counted, whether it's for the second week of March or the second week of April when we get those numbers. But I guess I am worried that even though April was down 7.5%, the reality of May and June for income taxes may actually be lower. And so even if I look at the 100% pessimistic, it's not showing very much negative change in the individual income tax. I mean, we could talk about what's going to change in the next 6 weeks for sales, like how much more people are going to buy, or 5% more, 10% less in the next 6 weeks. But I am worried about the April compared to May and June for the individual income, because I'm afraid I just don't know if that 7.5% assumption, which is the control for April, whether May and June will be the same, higher, or lower. And my gut would be that 7.5% negative seems like a fairly good number, and May and June might actually actually be lower than that. So I would probably be more willing to put a higher percentage on pessimistic, not just because I believe in the pessimistic, but because the model that we're doing is using a steady flat rate, which I certainly understand why it was used. I can't give a better number, but my guess is the number likely will be worse than this 7.5% decrease. But I'm happy to hear others tell me that they don't think that's the case.
And to be clear, a lot of these numbers, we don't have full April behavior, right? So we don't have the full effect of the shutdown. Some of the numbers are from April numbers or March numbers, which is a split month. And so we've only got part of what the shutdown's effect is showing us.
Yeah, in particular on the sales tax, the April receipts were primarily March activity, and on withholding, the April withholding, we get 2 payments for the twice monthly filers, and that's the predominant number of filers. And the April 10th payment was based on March 16th through the 31st, and the April 25th payment was based on April 1st through the 15th. So you had a combination of March and April in the withholding number.
Sorry, folks, quality's not quite as good. I had to switch TVs because my cell phone battery was running down.
I've been trying to figure out from day one here how much is kind of already baked in because of the cash approach to accounting that the state generally uses. We're sitting here with really 39 days left to go, but in a quarter, but yet a lot of the data may already be sort of baked in because of the lag in payments. So what's your sense of this income tax and sales tax? How much of that do we really already know? In fact, we haven't collected the money yet.
Well, the last thing I did before I came down here today was printed off we've got through the 20th of May in the books already, and unfortunately, the month of May is about an $840 million month, and we've only got about $400 million in the bank, $394.9 million in the bank. So it's tough to draw a lot of conclusions about the month of May, but you're right. That's why I've got the bottom set of panels to just concentrate on May and June, because you're right. A good bit of the quarter's already baked into the cake. April's one of the bigger months. I don't think I'm answering your question though. But I did look at the receipts through May 20th, and we only have about a little under half of the money from the month of May in here, and it's too early to draw any real conclusions.
And my other quick question was, you mentioned you looked at breakout for travel and tours related kind of industries on sales taxes.
Yeah.
And how I would suggest those numbers are extremely small in the real world because hotels have essentially been shut down. You go in downtown Louisville, there's nobody open. There's nobody there except construction workers and homeless people for the most part. And so, do we have a sense of how much of that number is going to be very, very small in both May and June?
Agreed. And those sectors make up about 12.8% of the sales tax revenue. So if you look at total sales tax revenue in a normal month, restaurants, hotels, and entertainment venues would make up, 12.8% of the sales tax. And you're right, in April and May, which would be May and June sales tax collections, 12.8% of the sales tax is going to be a really low number. So that's why I wasn't at all surprised to see the need for May and June to be quite negative. Like we've got 60/40 up now, and it's got sales tax declining 22.9%. I can easily see that occurring.
Janet, what's the view from the north?
I don't think I'm gonna be comfortable with anything higher than a 50-50 on control versus pessimistic, and maybe what I really question more income tax elections they actually finally come in. Or
So, that's a comment for one?
Yep, she's here.
Oh. You want to offer some observation?
I think
I
I'm the
can't
one,
see you.
I'm sorry. Yeah, no, I'm the one that thought the 50-50 was the best we could do, because just, I think the same level of uncertainty that Janet's talking about, I just don't feel comfortable going above that.
I think for a change, I'm the most pessimistic person in the group. But I
don't
just think
know.
I could be
model-
persuaded to be more pessimistic.
I think in the short run, I'm pretty pessimistic, Frank, with you.
Yeah.
I think longer speaking, as you start looking at the full calendar year, I may be
Okay.
less pessimistic.
Yeah.
But in the near term, I'm pretty pessimistic.
So, where does that leave it?
So where would you go, Frank, if you were gonna pick it all by yourself? What's your number?
I would go 100% pessimistic, to be honest. I think these models fail to capture the downturns adequately. They also fail to capture the upturns. But again, you're talking about
Greg, can you show us 25-75?
That'd be a 3.7% decline from enacted, or 423.5 million.
And to be clear, the enacted was the lowest bound that they could use off of a CFG estimate. Is that true?
That's exactly correct.
Yeah.
I would be comfortable with Frank's 100% pessimistic outcome at this moment for the rest of the year.
This is Alan. I would agree for the next 45 days, I would be perfectly fine saying that IHS market's gonna miss maybe just a little bit, and they're gonna miss on this side. So for the next month and a half, I'd say 100% pessimistic by their model.
I'm starting to be persuaded. Greg or anyone else, we've got the May IHS market, and I've got that in front of me. How much of a deterioration do they have between their April and their May national outlook?
I'm gonna bring Michael back up for that.
Because the numbers we're talking about are based on the April numbers.
This is Michael again. That is correct. However, to reiterate on some of the more important variables, for example, real GDP, in the pessimistic scenario in the near term, rather than the negative 0.6% for fiscal 20, the May forecast would have it at negative 1.6%. The pessimistic forecast, which is currently using the April IHS market forecast, is negative 3.0% for GDP. The May May pessimistic is minus 3.4%. So a little more pessimistic. In terms of employment, it's a similar story. The employment forecast for the April, the current pessimistic for fiscal 20 is negative 2.0%. In May, the pessimistic is negative 4.0%, so twice as large. Manufacturing, a little more significant. Pessimistic is minus 2.8 versus minus 3.0 in the, both of those are the pessimistic on 20 and for each of those respectively. Personal income, instead of being slightly positive in the pessimistic forecast, it was 0.4% growth for 20. In the May pessimistic, it's a slight decline, negative 0.02%, but still switching from positive to negative growth. And I think one of the variables that is really germane would be real consumer spending. In the current pessimistic forecast, negative 4.66% decline in fiscal 20. In the May pessimistic forecast, it's minus 4.96. So approximately a negative 4.7 versus a negative 5% decline in consumer spending. So in the near term, most variables are slightly more pessimistic. It's the out year, fiscal 21, where the May pessimistic is slightly more optimistic than what we saw here. But if you're talking about just the near term, the May IHS market forecast on the pessimistic side would make you slightly more pessimistic than the April numbers. And of course, if I have all the variables, if there's any others, I thought I would just hit some of the highlights.
In terms of how that would affect the revenue models, I can talk to the sales tax model, and using the May would have brought the sales tax model down. I want to say maybe $10–20 million for the control, and about the same for the pessimistic. We're only talking about essentially the 2 months, so it would be a lower forecast by about 10, 20, maybe $30 million.
So
Thank you for that. I mean, and that, for me, this is John Perry again. For me, that kind of just aligns with my gut feeling that the near term is going to be more negative. I mean, that seems to be what those numbers are suggesting, and maybe in the out years, less bad, which would push me more to the 100% pessimistic in this case.
Yeah, that's where I am too right now.
Me too.
And so am I. Travels with the Stevens, John Stephenson here, former Superintendent of Education, Commonwealth of Kentucky. Trying to bring this to you for an education purpose here. You can go see it a lot better at KET, but I thought I'd have it for folks that wanted to look on my Facebook site.
So, is that a consensus, or is there a strong objection to it? Excuse me, family not? I take it?
So just for the record then, we're talking about an estimate for the full year of 20 to be $10,991.5 million.
Correct.
Which would be a 456.7% difference from enacted, or a 4% reduction from enacted. Would be the consensus I'm hearing.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
I'm gonna go ahead and hit save. Well, we do have the road fund to go yet, so do you want to ponder a little bit more on the general fund, or you want to shoot into the road fund? Hearing nothing, we're gonna go to the road fund.
So for the road fund, I took a similar approach that I did for the other accounts. I looked at my April interim forecast, what that meant for the needs for May and June, and then made adjustments to that. So if we look at our control interim forecast for the full year, $1,435.4 million, or a decline of 8.3%, which meant we would be the difference from official would be $116.4 million. Looking at the yellow highlighted portions in May and June, this shows what we would need in those 2 months. The highlighted ones are the ones I made adjustments for. I will talk about the fuels, since it is such a large account, and why I decided not to change that. So the drawback with the fuels are there's a lag in the activity and the collections. So the April collections reflected March activity. We collected $56 million. I think that was an 11 or 12% decline. Unfortunately, that is a late arriving receipt. Returns are due on the 25th of the month, so far we haven't seen anything, any real money in that account. Last month, to give you an indication, of the $56 million we collected, $50 million of it came in on the 28th, so we're not going to know anything until one of the last days of the month. So, looking at transportation data, they have vehicle counting stations set up throughout the state. They have 95 of them. And they do weekly counts on the vehicles that come across. That's spread throughout the state, all the major thoroughfares. So they look at cars and trucks, semis, and what they call single unit trucks, which I'm not sure what that is, but it's somewhere, I assume, between a car and a truck and a semi. Beginning in the middle of February through, for the week beginning of February through the first week of March, generally increases or very small declines. Beginning on the week beginning March the 15th, we saw car count decline 23%. Semi-trucks were down 1%. Then for the next several weeks, the decline in the motor vehicles were right around 40 to 42%. The semis were about 21%. Now that's not going to be a direct decline in gallonage, but we can see that there was a significant decline in the number of vehicles that were out. So the anticipation is that the May receipts are going to be worse than they were in April. They will pick up a bit in June. So the fact that we were 57 million in April, I can imagine it being, say, 35 million perhaps this month, 40 million in June, which would put us right about 75. Anyway, it's really kind of guesswork, but I feel like the 75 million that we need for the last 2 months is going to be in the ballpark of what we need, so I decided not to make a change to that account. So, we talked about the 4 accounts I'm going to look at. Again, these are not model driven, but they're really accounting based. The revisions were relatively small, anywhere from a decline of $8 million to $10 million, with a net increase to the road fund of $6 million, which would leave us with the new control forecast at $110.4 million below the official estimate. So, motor vehicle usage tax, control forecast. We walked away after the April receipts, we would need $45.8 million for May and June. April receipts were surprisingly strong at just under $20 million. I say surprisingly strong because I didn't anticipate the online sales would be as strong as they were. I thought this would be closer to half that or less. Given that we got $20 million in April, that the dealerships have started to open on May 11th, with the restrictions, that amount is going to increase over the next 2 months. It'll increase, I think, in May and then increase a bit more in June. When I looked this morning, month to date, we have collected approximately $22 million in usage tax. We still have another week to go. So I added $10 million to that, which gives us a needs of $55.8 million. It's possible that could be a little bit low, but certainly the forecast needs to be raised in that account. In terms of the license tax, the needs were $26.5 million for May and June. In April, we collected $12.2 million, which was a 38.5% decline. I lowered that forecast by $8 million. I talked about it a little bit when I talked about the property tax. The property tax is paid at the same time on these licenses. There are a variety of ways that people can renew those taxes. They're not really doing it or making use of that in the way that I thought they would. I thought more people would renew online or by phone or any of the other things. And with a 90-day extension, that money will come in July, potentially. That is one account that we're not going to be leaving the books open for. So we're going to be not collecting as much as we thought. The motor vehicle operators, this is your driver's license. There's no online or other ways for renewals at this point. The needs for May and June, $2.8 million. The April receipts were $800,000. I lowered that by $1 million, thinking that once the circuit clerk's office is open to the public, there will be a little bit of collections in that, but not as much as we previously thought.
Gene, sorry, Dr. Bollinger has a question.
Yes.
Yeah, Gene, so I'm curious about how they're going to handle the accounting. Suppose that my operator license is due, say, in May, and I take advantage of the 90-day extension and renew it in August. I think that's right.
Yes.
Where will that money go into this fiscal year or next fiscal year?
That'll be next fiscal year. Greg can correct me. I think he mentioned 10 accounts. It's primarily the corporate and the individual declarations and returns where they will leave the books open and money collected in July will be moved into this fiscal year. All other accounts, that money will will stay in the next fiscal year, in fiscal 21.
Thank you, Gene. John Perry has a question now.
Sorry, I guess I was on the same track as Chris. I don't know if that's good or bad. But I was wondering why some accounts are left open and some aren't left open, and that may be a detail-oriented question, but it seems relevant to this conversation.
That's a good question. Perhaps Greg would like to, I don't know if he has more information on.
I don't know precisely why the 10 revenue codes that were chosen were the only 10 to be altered, but I do know that the ones where the governor himself said that we're going to push back a deadline, the 10 revenue codes are in estimated payments and payments with returns and non-resident withholding There's 4 categories of non-resident withholding that are part of the revenue codes. In terms of, and we've talked to the auditor, and we're all square with the accounts that we're remaining open. Maybe it's, I can't really explain. Those are the only general fund accounts that would have been affected necessarily by the timing. Maybe because it's the road fund instead of the general fund. I don't know, but Gene was correct when he said that those accounts, if you made it, there would be no attempt to pull that money back into fiscal 20. If you paid in July, it stayed in July for those accounts.
Thank you.
Well, I think we've done just about all we can do here, folks. Hope you've enjoyed this. Travels with the Stephensons.
Other, which is generally
See what he has to say here.
After the interim forecast in April, the needs would be $4.1 million, $4.4 million, I'm sorry. In April, we collected $6.1 million. Given the strength of the April receipts, I chose to increase that by $5 million. So the new needs would be, we would need $9.4 million in the last 2 months. This shows the control forecast. The new forecast would be a decline of 8% or $110 million less than the official forecast. In terms of the pessimistic forecast, I chose to make adjustments to motor fuels usage and license tax in this. So the revisions are a bit larger than they were under the control forecast, with a net change of an increase of $32.8 million, leaving us $161.8 million less than the official estimate. Under this scenario. So under the fuels, the needs would be $38.7 million. Again, in April, we collected 56. We expect that to go down, but at $38.8 million would leave us somewhere in the area, less than $20 million in May and June. And for reference, we averaged approximately $64 million a month for the first 10 months of the year. While we anticipate that these receipts are going to go down, I can't imagine they would go down to $20 million on average for May and June. So we raised that forecast by $20 million, which leaves us at $50.8 million for the needs for the last 2 months, or a 56.2% decline relative to that same time period in the prior year. In terms of the usage, the needs would be $18.7 million under the pessimistic scenario in terms of what we need to collect in May and June. Again, in April, we collected nearly $20 million, so we